this evening for the book launch, Manifesto, a new vision for South Africa. Now, the people I see here are not ordinarily the people I would see at a Manifesto launch rally. So I think Songezo has done something quite interesting to attract people to Manifesto. And usually we launch manifestos or see manifestos being launched during elections. And we are nowhere having an election, so I think it's going to be an interesting conversation to say why a manifesto or why manifesto. And he'll probably this evening about the vision behind the new vision for South Africa. And why does South Africa need a new vision to begin with? What's wrong with what we have? Forget that it might be dark at any hour while we are here. But South Africans are also very good at getting used and accommodating problems. I see now there are jokes about load shedding rather than protests about load shedding. There are jokes about crime in society rather than protests about crime in society. There's a sense of numbness to murders. I mean, every time I see the crime stats, I'm always so weirded out. Like, how do people keep quiet when 6,000 people are murdered in the space of 3 months? And we've not spoken about the thousands who die on the roads and the thousands who die from very preventable diseases, which are lifestyle diseases and so on. But anyway, it's not my event. I'm just the accidental host and facilitator today. My name is Lukhona Mnguni. This chap for just over a decade now. And we've been in conversation about South Africa probably almost every day of knowing each other. And so it's a great pleasure to facilitate this book launch, which I think it's only befitting that he comes and launches the book in the province of his birth. I'm sure abanye abantu were looking at him and saying, "Hi, Bofondini, wako Cape Town, wako Joburg, when are you coming home?" So, Khadebe. Bungane Mtimkulu, both ears beautiful, Ndlebentle zombini, ngelengele. Welcome home, and I think we are going to have a fascinating conversation. I'm going to give Songezo a chance to just share with us about the book, and if he wants to maybe read something out of the book, and then after that we'll get into a nice 360-degree conversation with each other.
Thank you, Mtim, and good evening, everyone. So I'm going to mix isiXhosa and English. Although I struggle with that, with me, I either speak English only or ndithetha isiXhosa esisulungekileyo kuphela. But I appreciate that we need to accommodate everyone, especially people who are streaming from different parts of the province and the country. So my name is Songezo Zibi. I'm from Kanduli, in the OR Tambo District Municipality in general, and KSD Municipality in particular. I grew up here. Actually, I went to high school, the last 2 years of my schooling, just up the road at All Saints College in Bisho. It's a police college these days. But that's where I did my standard 9 and standard 10 in the early 1990s. I voted in 1994, so I've been around for quite some time. Although some people say that's not true, but I did. I voted in 1994. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to talk specifically about what's in the book because I'd like us to have a conversation. I'm going to talk about why I wrote the book. I'm going to talk about why I wrote about the things I wrote about in the book. And I'm also going to share some of the backstory of how the book came about and the different conversations that I had with different South Africans so that we can have the conversation. I'm assuming that at least for most of you, you'll get the book outside and you'll get an opportunity to read it yourself. So I love writing. I didn't realize I love writing until I started doing it. My English teacher is actually supposed to come here, so I expect him here anytime. I love writing, and I rather write about other things actually, not politics. Although I love following politics because it is important to how you shape and determine the future, the present and the future of any country or society. But I've had to write about politics in this book because our country is in deep trouble. We must be frank about it. It's in deep trouble. And I'll talk about the different ways in which our country is in trouble. So apart from the fact that the lights really could go off while we're here, which is a very serious thing. I remember in the late 1990s reading in the this Daily Dispatch, about rolling blackouts in Zimbabwe. We didn't have electricity in Mqanduli then. I think we got electricity around 2008, thereabouts. But there was this concept of blackouts in Zimbabwe because they couldn't sustain their own electricity supply. And it seemed like something that was out of the books because I couldn't conceive it. And there was a time, and many of us will remember, whenever someone attempted to make the comparison with Zimbabwe, people would get angry. They would get angry because it seemed too similar to what white people who were upset about democracy used to say. And so we didn't want to confront the truth and ask whether there is any sliver of truth in what people are saying. Is there a potential for it? And the nature of human beings is that when we get told, for those who have children, you keep telling a child not to stick their hand in the heater or the fire, they keep doing it. And then eventually they burn themselves and then they start crying. That's how we are as human beings. We never want to see what's really happening. We never want to accept it for what it is. We always want to take the optimistic view that it's going to get better. So clearly it has not. It has not got better. So apart from the lights, I also sometimes see on social media that here in Buffalo City, sometimes the water that's coming out of the tap is dirty. Okay, that's not a good thing. It's not a thing to get used to. If you come from where I come from, we actually have no running water in any event. And it's not normal for people to not have running water. And so these are the things we do. We will swear at Helen Zille on Twitter about the sanitary conditions in the informal settlements of the Western Cape, but we will not be outraged at the same thing back where we come from. So I come from a village. So everyone in South Africa should have a flush toilet. Everybody. Everybody. There is nothing about living in a village that says you should not have one. Everybody should have it. But we don't. We need to think about why that does not bother us. Because if we are to be consistent, it must bother us in the Western Cape, and it must bother us in the Eastern Cape or the Free State and other places. Because we are people of principle. So we must think about why that principle is important. I'm saying this for a reason, because I'm getting somewhere with it. And don't worry, I won't make a long speech. I'll be done soon, so we can have a conversation. But that's just one example that I want to talk about. I also want to talk about something like unemployment. So this is the nature of unemployment in South Africa. In the latest quarterly labor force survey, like many others, but they've taken particular care to break down the percentage of the unemployed, to categorize them. So 50.1 or 50.2% of people who are unemployed do not have matric. They have not gone past matric. So Lukona here, who's a researcher, will tell you about the throughput rate, or Mku there at the back, will tell you about the throughput rate of children who enter the school system, do not die, but they don't come out at the end after 12 years. Those children end up being part of that 50%. About 40% of the unemployed only have matric and nothing else. And when I say nothing else, they can't even do hair, people's hair. Not that that's not important, but really they've got nothing else. So that means 90%, just over 90% of the unemployed either have matric or have no matric. Okay. So let us then shift and imagine Ibrahim Patel talking about how we're going to create jobs. Does he mention this problem? So let me complete the statistic. Unemployment for those people that have a post-matric qualification is in the single digits. It's less than 10%, as you've already worked it out. It's still a lot of people because in other countries, all of unemployment is 4 or 5% anyway, right? But it gives you an idea of the picture. So this is what happens to people who are unemployed. First of all, it hurts their dignity. Because people don't like handouts, they don't like depending on other people. They want the ability to provide for themselves, to do things for themselves so that they can be men and women who are proud of what they do. So we deprive them of that ability. That's the first thing. The second thing is that work is like anything. So one of the things I do very well, I may not look like it, but you see, you will not get many people who are better than me. But I started at age 7 with my grandfather. I can hold a 15-minute tutorial here. And lube straight. So I can do it. But I started early. So this is what happens. When you don't get an opportunity to work, it's like anything. You do not develop the muscle and the ability to do this thing efficiently and get better at it. And so you have a situation where for the people who are up to age 35 years old, the unemployment is 60% thereabouts. So that means over time, we will have the majority of the working population not having the experience to work. That means we can't grow this economy because you need people who can. So it's like taking someone from Mkanduli Football Club and try and put them in the Champions League because that's where the rest of the world is, to compete so that we can grow this economy against other countries who are also trying to do the same. So if people do not have the opportunity to work as early as possible, it means whatever a minister or somebody stands in front on a podium and says they're going to do is really actually meaningless for most people. Because they talk about the jobs that require qualified people, right? We're going to encourage beneficiation and do all of these things, right? Okay, fine. You will do it for the people that have passed matric and have a skill. What about the people actually that we have not been able to keep in school and make sure that they pass? What about those people? We have no plan for them. Nothing. There is nothing. The public works program is not a real thing. Let's not kid ourselves. It doesn't teach somebody much. It doesn't. Right? So you've got that kind of problem. I'm going to make 2 more points and then I'm going to shut up. I also reflected on the state of our society as a whole. So, let us reflect on, I'll come to the political, but let's talk about the personal. If somebody approaches any of you here and asks you to help them to commit a crime, the thing that's going to bother you is, what is it about me that made you think you can come to me to help you with this? What did I ever do to give you this impression that you can do this? Right? That's what you're going to think. That's what's going to offend you. Okay. So park that. You then have people who have been mired in scandal for stealing And let's be Africans now. Alifunwa isela in African culture. If ulisela, you steal. You are the lowest of the low morally. Right. And yet you have people who have stolen, who have facilitated stolen, believing that we are the kind of people who will elect them to leadership and accept them. So here's my question. What have we done to give them the impression that they can go for it? What have we done? Clearly, we have given them the impression that this is okay. So what have we done? So I also write about the ethical and moral fiber of our society and what has happened to us. Why are we these people? So what makes Zweli, who has been mired in the kind of problems that he has, to say, I also want to be president? Why do we give him that impression? So clearly we have. We have done so. So we also need to look within ourselves to see what we've done. And so, as my last or maybe second last point, because I can never stop when I say 5, then I mean 6. So what I have done is I've spent a significant part of the book reflecting on the last 27 years of democracy. So we've had democracy for as long as Madiba was in prison. And so reflecting on the last 27 years and what's working and what's not working. Usually what's really important to talk about is the thing that's not working. Because if you choose to only talk about the things that work, one day your house is going to collapse. Right? But that's what has happened for a very long time. People say, oh yeah, but you are so negative. Why don't you focus on the positive and so on? Well, the lights are going off now. Right? We've been focusing on the positive the entire time. In Gabecha, they don't have water. People go for days without washing. They don't have water. That's a reality. In Aliwal North, the problem is going on for much longer. So I've reflected on the last 27 years. And that's because I also realized some of the things we wanted to do to solve a particular set of problems. So I see in the room there are people who look like they voted in '94 also. So I'll go down memory lane a little bit. And, you remember in 93, 94, and we have a white South African in the room, so he might remember this or know people. But you remember when there were genuine fears that minorities might be abused and killed by the communists who were coming in from outside. So black people might do things to minorities. So some people stocked water and canned food and so on in anticipation of the coming thing, and stocked weapons and so on. So we ended up with this proportional representation system. Also as part of another compromise. I don't know how many people remember the Concerned South Africans group, which had Opa Gozo and Mango Sutu and Mangope and Constant Viljoen and so on, right? The guys wanted a federation in South Africa. In fact, the IFP nearly didn't take part in the election. If you look at pictures of the old ballot, but I remember because I voted, the ballot paper, which was very long, had the Soccer Party and the Kiss Party and everything. At the bottom, it had the Inkatha Freedom Party pasted on because the IFP nearly didn't participate in the election, right? So we ended up with a proportional representation system. The reason this was done was to make sure that even if you got your Amishan Rajbansi and you were representing Indians in your mind, you still had a vote and everybody would feel represented. So we'll dish the constituency system, because if we use it, then the ANC might dominate and then really come for minorities and kill them. So let's be nice people and say we're going to have a proportional representation system. Right. And then South Africa was called a miracle because we didn't descend into an orgy of violence and kill each other. Great. Except now, we have things called deployment committees and party lists and so on, and political parties that can ignore you. And a president who can say, hey, where my me, and not give a shit what the rest of the population thinks. Because you can actually do nothing about it. Doesn't matter how much you complain, you can do nothing about it. So that's what that system gave us. So let me ask, how many of you here know where your constituency office for the person who supposedly represents you in parliament or the legislature? I'm not going to ask you to stand up. Just put your hand up and say, I know who represents me in parliament. Okay, nobody. Nobody does. Or maybe one or two, I don't know, I didn't see a hand, but really nobody does. Okay, so let's think about it. A representative system where you don't know who represents you. You don't know. And they will deploy someone from 600 kilometers away to a constituency here where they know nobody. How does that make any sense? It doesn't. It doesn't make any sense. So we have to think about what's working and what's not working. What we know is that that system doesn't work. It doesn't work because the system is supposed to work like this. The government executive, i.e. government, the president and premiers, are supposed to be overseen by those who sit in parliament or the legislature. The people that sit in parliament are, in the end, really chosen by the people they're supposed to oversee. Right, so how good a job do you think they're going to do? In all seriousness. Because if you make too much noise, you'll just get redeployed to your couch at home. As it has happened to lots of different people who took their jobs as MPs too seriously. So what we then know is that this system, as we have conceived it, is not working. So we've got to change it. So I do talk in the book about what we must change and how we must change it. My sister is here. And how we must change it. So that's just one example. And the last point I want to make is the following, that we have believed a lie, one, and secondly, just out of our history that we've just come out of, that leadership is a special thing, that unless you are a Madiba or so, there's a special anointing that you need to have in order to be a leader. Now, let me disabuse all of us of that notion. So I was talking to Loza this morning, and we're talking about this. And I said, that notion is false, because you see, a country is a home. It is a home. We all belong here. We live here. And by the way, a reality is that unlike Zimbabweans who were able to run here, when this country crashes, where are we going to go? To Lesotho. Where are we going to go? Okay, so we can try join the Guptas in Dubai without the money. But where are we going to go? We have nowhere else to go. I don't have anywhere else to go. And so it's no different to what we have to do in our families and our homes. That when things are not going well, we have to step up and fix them. Nobody in the context of our homes calls you a leader. It's about fixing izinto zekhaya. Right, it's about fixing izinto zekhaya. That's it. And what I'm saying is that we must fix izinto zekhaya. And when you do that, if there is a cousin or relative opoxayo, you kick them out of the meeting. We know this. So who told us not to apply this principle in the case of the country? Because you see, democracy is not a foreign concept to us as Africans in that sense. But what do we hear? We hear people saying that this constitution is a problem, we must do away with it, and that sort of thing, because they want to create an excuse for the things they have not done. They've run out of all the excuses. It's now the constitution that is a problem. And if you get rid of the constitution, which by the way means then we can stay in power forever. Because this constitution that says you must have human rights, you must have the Bill of Rights and so on, is the problem. My question is, for who? Is a problem for who? Because the only thing that has prevented absolute disaster for most people is that the courts have been able to say, no, 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 you will give the people the HIV drugs, you will give them. This same constitution has said housing is a basic right. You will build houses for people as a basic right. This constitution has said people must have equal marriage rights. This same constitution. And yet people clap today when politicians say this constitution is a problem. So let me go back to that question I had before I shut up. Can we reflect on what we're doing that gives these people the sense that they can take us for granted and treat us like idiots when we're grown up? And that we believe ourselves to be children instead of ukulungisa izinto zekhaya. And so what I do here is that part of it is saying what's wrong, and the rest of it is saying the kind of things we must do ukulungisa izinto zekhaya. But there's no election in ukulungisa izinto zekhaya. You don't need to be elected. You need to get up and do it. Because you know, otherwise it's tickets, the family. And we must not be discouraged, especially up at Pondwe. And we must be honest. We won't say, I'll ask Keith not to point the cameras at you when we talk, if things are going to get interesting when you get back to the office. So you can talk off camera, right? But I want to say, we are the province of Nelson Mandela and Oliver Tambo. Do we really measure up to that legacy? I don't think we do, but we can. So, let me shut up.
Yes, please. No, thanks, Khadebe, for that summation of the journey that you've walked, but also where we are as a country. So my job was defined to be a very easy one, just point at people. But now the broadcaster in me is coming out, so I'm going to ask you a few questions.
That's fine.
And that's partly because you did not, I mean, I know why, but I'll ask you some things that are in the book. But I actually want to start off with where you started about unemployment. So unemployment in the Eastern Cape is, in the real definition, because there's also another misnomer with our statistics. We've got the official unemployment rate, and then we've got the expanded definition of unemployment, which is actually the real. Because if you're saying some people are discouraged, they are no longer looking for work, they've given up looking for work, those people are really, really not working. So this official rate is really an interesting one because it counts people who are still actively looking for employment. But these people are not employed. Now, in the Eastern Cape, the expanded definition of unemployment is at about 53%, which means that the majority of working age people in the Eastern Cape are not at work. We can then do another study about the employed and how they are underemployed and the salaries and blah, blah, blah. But let's park that. Majority of working age population is not at work in the province. Amongst black women, the statistic is similar, about 54, 55%. Now, people like you and I, and you are far better than I because you worked in this province, you studied in this province. I left this province in grade 8. And I was in KwaZulu-Natal for my
That's standard 6 for our generation.
Form 1 for another generation. I left the province in grade 8. I went to KZN where I did my high school. I went to Johannesburg where I did my first stint at university. Went to KZN, went to Scotland, have worked in KZN and now work in Joburg. I literally have my home in this province. And you and I get accused of having let down the province by not coming back. Now, part of your journey, which is captured in the book as well, is that you left what many would probably look at and say was a fantastic and lucrative job at ABSA because you wanted to roll your sleeves and get working on the country. I suppose the next question is, when are you moving back to the Eastern Cape? But at the start of the book, you talk to the professional class a lot in terms of the duties that we have and use our privileges to give back to society. But the truth is that the state of the country is so fragile that it's difficult for people to want to make that leap of sacrifice, to want to believe that they can abandon their stations that at least cushion them and give them some comforts about where they are in life, and go on a national mission that they have no idea who they are going to walk the path with, how it's going to unfold, and where they should play. How do you give confidence to citizens of South Africa who are extremely disillusioned by where we are, but who want things to work, but keep saying, somebody actually said on Twitter, on one comment I was sent this afternoon by a colleague, in 2024, the Eastern Cape must have no voting rights because they distort the national outcome. They just don't want to vote differently, abantu bapayana. So, funeka suspend from voting in 2020 so that we can get better national outcome. I want you to spend a bit of time with all that I've said. The role of the professional class, giving reassurance to people that your call to action for them to do something about it is actually the right thing in a very fragile and precarious environment. And what needs to happen about this province? Because as somebody who's born and bred here, who goes back home, Flagstaff, all the time, the picture has changed every year in the last 10 years, and it has changed completely for the worst. What needs to happen about this province as we talk about this sense of a new vision for South Africa? What's the new vision for the Eastern Cape?
And I'm not the other delicious. So there's a couple of things. One of the things I say in the book is firstly, there is a mental process that we need to go through. So there are certain things you need to internalize, that we all need to internalize. That's before you've done anything, you've sacrificed anything, is to just say, this cannot go on anymore. It can't go on anymore. So this far and no further. That's the first point. The next question is, so what do I do about it? But it's important to remain faithful to that conclusion, because I think what we do is we still look for a reason not to do, why it's not so bad, why it's maybe the worst that it can ever be, but it's not going to get worse than what it is, but it keeps getting worse. So I used to say, this is as far as I can tolerate, and it's not just about me, but it's also about the people in my family and in my community who are really, really, really struggling, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is to not accept and get used, is to, in fact, not accept, but to not get used to the gift of the givers being the government. We cannot. We cannot be people who depend on the gift of the givers because we have given up on our own government. To whom we pay tax, even if you're unemployed. VAT is tax. So you pay tax. And we depend on gift of the givers. So that's the second mental switch that we have to make. For those of us who live in Gauteng, we also have outsurance mobile pointsmen who direct traffic. No, the traffic lights must work. The traffic lights must work. And it's not to be snobbish to say the traffic lights must work. Because this is what happens. You have a series of traffic lights that don't work, that have not been fixed for a long time. Some people get to work late for the third time because they're a cleaner or whatever. They get into trouble. We might not think it's a serious thing, but it is. So the traffic lights don't work while the cops just nearby, they're there. They're just waiting for you to jump the stop sign and then they can ticket you. The city of Johannesburg, 6 years ago, would make a provision in its budget of approximately 700 million in revenues from speed fines, from traffic violations. And so there are things that are good that we must not accept, that they're a good thing, because you get used to them, you say that it is okay for things to remain dysfunctional. So that's on a mental level. And then the next phase is that if I am this outraged, what do I choose to care about? What's closest to my heart that I really care about? That is not just about me, but it's about other people. And is there an organization, any organization, that I can join that's trying to make that better? And not in a way that replaces the government, that tries to extract accountability. Now people say, yeah, we need a Black Afri Forum. Okay, let's say we do. Who's forming it? So let's be frank here. There is a thing that we black people do, which is to say we wish we could have 1, 2, 3. We could do what the Greeks are doing and the Jewish people do and that sort of thing. We just don't do it. So look for like-minded people who share the same values as you do. Because now you're starting ulungisa izinto zekhaya. It doesn't mean you are quitting your job to do this full time. The point I'm making is that democracy is a system of self-government, which means we have to be plugged in all the time. There is no off. Voting is just one incident in a continuous process of involvement. So look and find an organization that you want to belong to, that you choose to support. Even if you give 100 rand a year and you participate in its activities, that's how AfriForum is AfriForum. The people who believe in its principles, they give it something and they participate in its activities. And the last point I want to make is this, and it's also something that is mental. Guys, there's a term in Xhosa, it's makade. Guys, ANC isos makades as a South Africa. We must not be afraid of this. Isos makades alabe South Africa. We have no obligation to continue to vote for it or any other party. Because kusekhaya apha. And izinto zelikhaya mazenziwe ngendlela. And anybody who doesn't do izinto zelikhaya makaphume ngegate. There is nothing foreign about that concept. It's how democracies work. And when that person rehabilitates themselves, they can come back into the family. But they can't rehabilitate themselves here in charge. It doesn't work like that. And so we must internalize that so that we don't have the rest of the country saying we must be discounted off the ballot because we refuse ukulungisa izinto zekhaya. Let's not be afraid, guys. Let's not be afraid. Honestly, we have a big legacy to live up to of brave warriors here who fought 10 frontier wars against the colonialists over 100 years and all the way into the apartheid era. but siyoyika. So you can't do it.
Ingcuka. I'm going to open the floor for questions, but before I do that, Songezo, the last point you made, and in the book you talk a lot about building a new political culture, which is across the facets on how we build institutions, who gets to qualify to lead, and what are the policies that we prioritize as a society. There's also a section where you critique majorly the more popular political parties in the country. And for good or wrong reasons, they deserve the critique. Then the question that is left with the reader or the person listening is, where is this political alternative going to come from? Who must participate in building this political alternative? And I'm asking this because actually an article I just finished working on today, I'm warning about a problem that's going to stifle our democracy very soon, which is violence in our society. I've lived in KZN for a very long time, and I've seen people die there since 2011 because of politics. Well, they've died many times before then because of politics, but in democratic South Africa, we've really encountered a serious wave of people killing each other so that they can occupy some positions. In Beja, we've got a similar thing that is starting to grow, the collusion of violence and politics. And you find that deceased people are winning elections as ward councillors, and that's an automatic by-election. So this is bizarre, right? So where's this political alternative going to come from in that climate? And what do communities need to do to deal with the violence that threatens political participation?
So I think I'm going to build on the last point that I made about finding a non-political party organization to which you to belong. That's trying to fix a problem or problems in the community through the political process or political institutions, right? But what we must, if democracy is a system of self-government, we must accept that that work of agitation must necessarily result in political change. Must result in political change. And that work we must do through those organizations initially. So that's the first thing. Now, let me just park that and come back to why I critique the political parties, because I think that's important. And let's leave the ANC alone for a second, because I think we all know its challenges, and it often says them themselves, including Umkwati saying we eat the whole budget, not 5%. Now, if you look at the DA has become also a nationalist interest party, which is right-wing in outlook. And its federal chair spends a lot of time trying to needle black South Africans on things that really should have no political consequence. Because if somebody starts a conversation that says colonialism was not so bad, what are you trying to do? Which particular problem are you trying to solve? What are you trying to solve? That's one example. Her cousin should be Julius. Because anybody who reduces some of the challenges we have when it is convenient to race is missing the point. Deliberately so, because he's actually a very smart person. So the divisiveness is important because it is a bit of a distraction too. Because it takes your mind away from focusing on the really important things that we need to do. So I'm mentioning these. It's just part. I go into detail in the book itself on some of the policy propositions that they get. I mean, we're all from the Eastern Cape here. So in the villages. So if somebody came to our village and said, we're going to take land from white people and give it to you, Bapha belungu, eTranskei. But we also know abantu bafuna amanxiwa, right? So what does this conversation do for me, eXhorha? I still need land. Don't you care about me? Or do you care about being on TV because you're using a divisive angle to get into the news and look like you're doing something meaningful? For who? So yes, we have a landlessness problem in South Africa, but I also know kuyaliwe ezilalini because wonke umuntu ufuna umhlaba ongasendleleni. So what is the solution for that problem? What is the solution for the millions of young people who don't complete matric in any year and can't get jobs? So you're going to nationalize a bank and then what? Does that give them a skill? No. So there's the politics of gimmicks. That is exciting because it feels angry and urgent. Angry and not urgent, or loud and urgent are not the same thing. Angry and urgent are not the same thing. Urgent, yes. So what are we attracted to? Is it the anger or the urgency and the plan that we can relate to? So that's important. I'm saying this because I'm also warning against seeing anyone who's not the ANC as an alternative. And so then back to the question itself. So if these guys are unsuitable, so who becomes the alternative? I'm going to say we are. We are the alternative. So last year, 56% of eligible voters did not vote. 56%. So in the municipalities, we are now governed by the wishes of a minority. And so the people who did not vote have registered a political opinion, which is, we don't want these guys. Right? A lot of people I've spoken to did not make a mistake. They decided not to vote. They were not busy. They don't have excuses. They were not at a funeral. They just chose not to vote because stikiwe ngamasela. Right? So the alternative is us. The task we have, and why I talk about the professionals, is that our failure is a failure of organizing, of agency. There is no shortage of people around. I don't know any of you, but there's serious capability around this room. But when it is disorganized, it is worth nothing. It can't make any difference. And the difference between ourselves and the bad guys is that the bad guys are organized, and we are not. So that's the first thing. The question is, where do you organize? And belonging to an organization is the first step. The second step is to decide to agitate for political change. The third step is to try and build a movement based on principles. And what are those principles? The principle is we anchor this constitution and expand its meaning. Because that's the same constitution that gives us the entitlements we now have. We can expand them. That's the first thing. The second thing is we decide to define what justice looks like. Economic justice, environmental justice, and so on. So we believe we want to build a just society. So that becomes the second thing around which. So before the who, it's the what do we stand for. So we become a society that believes in justice and that we are going to do it ourselves. Firstly, as part of these organizations to which we belong. So that is the second. And the second last step is the following. I feel that what really needs to happen is that all of these organizations which are engaged in political work but define themselves as apolitical need to accept the political nature of their work and engage in politics. And we'll just leave churches out of that. The Treatment Action Campaign and Ndifuna Ukwazi and so on are engaged in political activity. What's stopping a coalescence of those organizations from deciding to have political positions around electoral reform, around accountability for public office bearers, and so on, and say, and mobilize as many people as possible to say, keep your manifesto under your arm. We have a people's manifesto here, and if you're not doing these 5 things, I don't want to talk to you, leave my house. And I don't want to go to your rally. You come to me, to our community meeting, we'll tell you what we want. You tell us which part of what we've told you you're going to do. And if you're not going to do it, bugger off. That's people taking their power back. It feels impossible because we haven't tried to do it. But I think we need to do it. Because that leads us to the final step, which is if you don't have the right people to do this, we will do it ourselves. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we change this electoral system as a political issue so that we can choose who represents us. And then we see what happens. But we can't just sit.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to ask for a few hands. We are, of course, at the launch of the manifesto. You probably want to hear if the issues that matter to you are represented in this manifesto, and is this the People's Manifesto? Well, Songezo will answer that a little later. But yeah, let's have some hands. There's a hand there. Can I note a few more hands, please? Okay, there's another hand. And this side, is this the back of the classroom? Okay, I've also been a teacher in my other life, so always worried when there's a side that doesn't talk and there's a side that talks. Okay, we'll take 2 from this side and 2 from this side.
Oh, hi. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. My name is Sakom. I am from Kobo, Kaiskamuhuk. I'm working here in East London. I just want to check, man, Songezo, do you think, what's your opinion about Gayton in the Karoo? Do you think he's grandstanding or he's kind of following the same formula that I think the manifesto is pushing us towards?
So the quick answer is that I don't know, actually, right? It's been too short a time. What Gayton's election, I can talk about what Gayton's election proves, though. It proves 2 things. For a person with his kind of background, it just shows what people are now willing to try. Because it's an indictment on people who are engaged in politics professionally and they go around. That a guy comes out of prison with the kind of track record that he does and he gets elected mayor. So that's the first thing that Gayton represents. The other thing that Gayton represents, he shows us what's possible that we're not doing. He does. Think about it. So we've been here. He was in prison. And then he came out and he was gallivanting with Kenny Kunene, eating sushi off. But he's a mayor now, right? We're still here complaining. So Gayton represents 2 things. What I don't know is whether he's grandstanding or not, because it's too soon. It's too soon. So we have to wait.
Okay, there's another hand there.
Thank you very much. My name is Mteza Kengele. Born in Alice, based in East London now. Manifesto. I think I'm going to ask you a question you're asking us.
Yeah.
I deliberately did not buy the book before coming here because I wanted to first listen to you. So I don't know what you are saying about this. Because you've mentioned democracy, and I didn't want to ask EP. And you've said it's been around for 27 years. And again, where? And looking at the situation that you also outline in the book, in the country, which is making me say, EP, injani, intoni yona khona. My question then was, sizakwenza njani ke ngoku? If you are mentioning an option of the professionals coming up to do something, bazawuqala njani? Somebody must do something, you kept on saying. And my worry is that even the professionals are asking the same question. I saw Tatu Jonathan Jansen, the professor, wrote on Twitter 2 weeks back saying, I don't understand that there's no electricity in South Africa, there's load shedding, and there are so many intelligent people. And I then said to him, "Tell to mail number yakho, because I thought you are one of those intelligent." So for me, ke ngoku nje benzisitsho ikhona endifuna ukufaka kuyo. Because I want to ask you, so what's the way forward? And the reason I'm saying that is because if this had taken place in May this year, it would have been a book launch for me. And I would buy it and go home, difunde, when I'm a guest speaker somewhere, and Songezo in his book Manifesto says, and that would be just it. But now it's so real because I just want to mention something that happened in June, quickly.
No, go ahead.
Which made me think deep about, Kanene, when I was at school, at varsity, what did they say democracy is, and where did they say it stays? On the 3rd of June, I walked into the National Office of Home Affairs after dealing with the local, the provincial office, blah, 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 up to the national, and I decided to walk in for a service I couldn't get. I was denied, just to ask if I can talk to somebody who can explain. And I was assaulted for 2 hours. I have a video my wife took. I was kept on my back after being dragged on the floor, on the ground. I was kept on my back for 2 hours with somebody having his boot on my chest inside a National Office of Home Affairs. I've communicated on the cell phones with everyone you can advise me of, up to the president. I don't know who's above that level, on their cell phones, and nobody wants to respond until today. And I'm asking myself, after that, I went to the police station to open a case. They chased me away like a robber or something. So for me, this is real. What's your plan? I'll assist you.
Thank you. I am on the spot here.
Don't abuse that phrase, Zibi. It has an IP.
So firstly, I heard about what happened to you, too. I heard about what happened to you. And it represents part of what you are saying. That is that we live in a democracy where there's supposedly accountability, and that sort of thing happens to you and nobody is held accountable. It is no different to the fact that in even worse cases, somebody gets killed and nobody is ever arrested and nothing happens. The Sunday Times had an article this last weekend about all the people that died in July last year, and nobody has been held accountable. So this is the democracy we have. It's become meaningless. And that's the essence of what I'm saying here, because the reason the president is able to hide money in his couch, and when someone comes and steals that money, they try and get the police to investigate off the books. And when they can't find it, he still won't even tell us how much was in the sofa. So how many people here keep their money in the sofa? Honestly, who does? Let's go back to what I was saying earlier, that we must call things what they are. People who hide money in the couch, in the mattress, that is illicit money. It is. Otherwise, it would be in the bank. If it was money for a business, it's in the safe, not in the sofa. So let us not be children. So the first thing I want to do is to agree with you, to say this democracy has become meaningless. One of the reasons I say here, we must change this system. That is in order to make the democracy meaningful, because it's meaningless. What can happen to you, it will happen to other people. It probably happened to somebody or 10 people yesterday. And they're also busy trying to find somebody to get some accountability, and nobody cares. Because why? Nothing will happen if I don't care. That's what's happening to you. That's how we all being victim. Many people are being victimized, and you continue to be victimized in that way. So when you say ipilo democracy, I'm saying to you, aiko. We go and we vote every 5 years, and as soon as we have, they forget about us. They don't care. We don't matter. That's why people protest and bend tires, because we don't matter otherwise. That's a reality. And that experience is manifested with this experience that you are saying. So that's, I want to agree with you, but I'm saying we then need to change it. The second thing is that I spoke earlier about being part of something that agitates for something political. That's important. So what Lukona and I have decided to do, and our other colleagues, is to start something called the Rivonia Circle. We have these same conversations in communities throughout South Africa to say, let's take our democracy back. Let's take our democracy back. Let us empower you as people from this area to change the situation in your community and then the rest of the country. Because waiting for someone to come from Pretoria to change it clearly doesn't work. You phone, you SMS, you phone the hotline and so on, nothing happens, right? And then when the president is coming, in Imbizo, they cut the grass and so on, make sure everything looks pashash, and then they leave, right? So being part of something that is agitating is important. The only thing I will say about where's my plan, the only thing I will ask that we do together is, one, to be brave. The only thing is to be brave and see ourselves taking over our own country and shaping it in the way that it should. That's an important first step. And secondly, to commit to having that conversation and taking it forward. Part of the reason we go around talking to communities is because we really do want the democratic change at a local level and get the accountability. And if people don't invite us to a community, we don't go. Because this democracy has worked on the basis of people parachuting themselves into a community and saying, we're going to solve all of your problems. And then they leave. The key thing is for people to start owning the power in their own area and driving that change. Taking it as far then as saying, we don't think the 5 of you over there are suitable. We want these guys now. Because they've been with us on this journey and we know them and we trust them. That's what happens in a democracy. That the only thing I'm committing to is to be faithful to this conversation. And to be bold and brave and take it where it needs to take us as South Africans. And not be afraid.
Dabane kuthiwe cika izibane ukuthi bethi igqugula fondini. Kuthiwe cika izibane siphume kule nto yecamera ne-TV ngo.
Good evening, everyone. I had my hand up and I was going to ask a question, and the gentleman from Alice asked something. I wanted to pull back, but I decided let me say it anyway. My name is Songezo Zibi. I'm from Mthatha. Xa ugoduka uqetha phaa which feeling ngasekhaya someday.
Left okanye ngase-right.
I don't remember. Oh, left.
Ngada usagoduki nje.
Well, cala ngaseQuqwa.
Yeah.
Okay.
For a, I think I'm a little bit. I think you did answer my question, but I need to confirm that. For many years, I worked for WordFest, book festival during the National Arts Festival in Makhanda. So that exposed me to a number of books reading. Some books were launched in my presence, and so on and so on and so on. And this morning, I was just thinking that, oh, I'm going to go to a book launch. Yes, it's Manifesto. And I have read a lot of books that speak to the problem we have. So many books, and with solutions to the glaring problem we have as a country. And this morning I was talking to a friend of mine next to me, William Gumede, Moeletsi Mbeki, Makaiza, and there's so many books that come with this. But we go to the next election and we choose the African National Congress to lead us to another elections and to another disaster, and we carry on. So I was thinking, sitting here, that when you said cowards, I think that was the answer to the question I have. But why does it carry on? Why should I think today I'm going to buy this book and read it, and then where are the writers? Do they end where the book gets published and they launch, gets sold, royalties and stuff, and then we go vote the ANC again? After reading the book, I didn't. After reading a number of books, we go vote the ANC again, and we don't remember anything we read from this book or from that book. We listen to Kwati there promising us that we're going to get jobs. Our children are going to get jobs. Our children are going to apply for NSFAS and go to university, and so on and so on. So I get lost there. Is it that we are cowards, really, or we don't understand, or we get tricked?
Okay, so I also don't know, right? And one of the reasons I said we are afraid is because I also know that people get victimized. So people are vulnerable. They are in jobs, they have small businesses and so on. And the people in power are vicious. They squeeze people. And people are suspended and they have to spend money on lawyers, money they don't have. They get bankrupted and so on. So the experience is terrible. So I'm not taking it lightly. It's something that happens. So I've been grappling with the same questions that you have. But in trying to answer the question in an honest way, I then found myself in the Daily Maverick as somebody who's running for president. But that's because I say in the book that I fully intend to try and do everything I write here. And I guess in a way, I was hoping that would be the difference between myself and the people you mentioned. Because, and I'm not criticizing them, they are writers. I mean, Eusebius is a writer, okay? But I think part of what makes people read and then walk away and just not vote anymore, or continue to vote for the ANC or whoever else, is because, you know, you read something that someone says, you want to look up to them to help you do it. And then, like he was saying, you say, maybe I can do it if you're also doing it. Now you write something and then you say, oh, but I'm also not going to do it. It kills the optimism. And so I decided to declare that, you know what, I really fully intend to do everything that I say here in the book. I don't know if I can, but I will do it. And I'm hoping that that simple declaration gets other people to say, okay, let's then see what we do. Because a small step Do I know what that change looks like eventually? I don't know. That's why I said I want to be honest to that conversation, because this is what we do. We read Amapungane and an expose in the Sunday Times or a book and so on, and nothing happens. So I'm hoping to change that. I hope that answers it. So I don't know why we do that. I'm searching for an answer, and I've tried by saying, okay, let me try and do what I say and see what happens.
I'd just like to declare that in the elections that I've participated in, I've voted for 6 different parties, and the ANC has never been one of them.
All right, good evening, Molweni. Igama lami nguPapa Mamnqandi. Khatebe, I serve on one of these organizations that you mentioned. And I thought that mhlawumbe mandibuze because even when Rivonia Circle popped up, I think the rhetoric was that here's another political formation of the order of magnitude of Lindiwe Mazibuko or the like.
Yeah.
My question to you is this about reigniting the public sphere? Is this about getting meaningful engagement to return to the South African public? If it is, then it's a great feat, because let's face it, public engagement is dead. And I mean, I think even it's surprising to see Daily Dispatch up. There was a time that we used to have things called dispatch dialogues in this part of the world. I'm not quite sure who decides when these things should happen and when they should stop happening. But you know, at some point, you talk about the need to get into the political realm, if you like. You know, there's South Africa for me strikes me as one of those countries that struggles with all kinds of literacy. Kubakho lento yesintu kuthiwe xa discusses into ezithile kuthiwa uyapolitika. And so automatically it sort of ostracizes those meaningful engagements from things that should matter in our daily society as citizens, and sort of polarizes the public sphere. And I wrote a piece in the Mail and Guardian. I think it came out on Monday. And one of the things that I'm grappling with is this idea of institutional literacy. And I think we ought to move to a realm of development thinking, and so that the political economy is located somewhere in our conception of development, but not the be-all and end-all of development itself, right? So, and so I'm wondering if because Uputi raises this point that there are many books that get written. I mean, and I think that one of the recurring errors that these books will probably make is that they will try and contend with the politicking, and they will find themselves in the same register that the political parties use to own the political arena. And you don't have sufficient resources to combat that. So you ask the question, Lubana, why do we get what we deserve in terms of the leadership that we have? And it's simple. These guys have decided that the professional class, if you like, is not their constituency. And so they don't lose sleep at night when they don't satisfy the needs of unemployed professionals or a diminishing economy. As long as they worry about the people who are their main clientele, they'll be fine. So you can howl till the dogs come home, nothing's going to happen. And so I think in your work around you know, whatever it is that you're trying to do, I think we should find a way to move South Africa to a more systematic conception of development. Because what happens is that if you erode the location of the political economy within an ambit of development, is that you end up with what Lushaba calls development as modernity and modernity as development. So every time people think about development, they are imagining a modern life. And so the role of the professional class ends up being consumption in that thing. It's not in itself, showing up a new country and a new society. And so in the end, though, I'm quite curious. I mean, the battle between Umqwati, the mineral energy complex on one hand, and the green lobby. Do you think that's going to take South Africa to what you're fighting for, of retaining the democratic order as we know it, or are we going to a South Africa of enclaves? And do you tackle that in terms of what kind of intellectual resources should we be allocating to that evolution as well, while we are trying to stop the water from coming in? Thanks.
Thank you. I'll try and answer your question through what I attempt to do in the book, to answer those very questions in as simple a way as possible. So that was my biggest difficulty, to use very accessible language to go through complicated, complex, or abstract, go through the abstract in a practical way. So I believe the way around this, to try and have an accessible conversation, is this. And I go into quite a lot of detail in it in the book. I try and conceive the kind of society we want to be, we want to have. And acknowledging that there are the realities of history and culture and location and so on. And ground that on certain values and principles, which in another language is ideology, right? So I say, in my view, the soul of South Africa and our constitution, the political morality of South Africans, is social democratic in outlook, which means we believe in justice, we believe in equality, we believe in social solidarity, and so on, right? But then I ask, so what does this mean in reality? And so I use Mkanduli a lot in this book to explain the kind of things that we need to do to try and get around this modernity is development and development is modernity. So as a principle, development is not urbanizing rural areas. Okay, it's not urbanizing rural areas. You don't need to change the way of life of people from a cultural and historical perspective in order to advance development. You ask the question differently, that is, what kind of society are you looking for? Whether you are in urban areas, are there principles that anchor us in terms of what we do? One. Two, and therefore what do you do in order to develop and grow those? So I talk quite a lot, I write quite a lot about what a functioning community looks like. Properly functioning democratic community, wherever you are, it needs to have a social infrastructure and certain social entitlements. So there is nothing that says in our villages it must be pitch black and you fall into potholes and things, that there are no markings, there is no demarcation of any kind. And if an ambulance, I make an example about an ambulance that's looking to fetch someone from a village at 11 p.m. Think about it. How difficult that must be. The house is not lit, there's no street, there is nothing, right? You're trying to find this house where you need to fetch somebody who's critically ill. You can't. So what does a proper social infrastructure look like? What are the basic entitlements that citizens and children growing up there need to have in order to develop properly as a human being who is grounded in their own heritage and so on? So I write quite a bit about that because that's important. It's not just sporting facilities and cultural facilities. It's another way of defining the social cohesion that we talk about, which is not building a tall flag, but saying you want a community to be a proper community, to say it is not okay that in order to get economic opportunity, someone must uproot themselves from their own space and go and live elsewhere. so that they may develop an income and that sort of thing. So I talk quite a bit about that. I don't want to get into a long discourse, but I talk quite a bit about that because I think it's important. That then that helps us define what kind of political economy we should have. Because you know what morally you want to do, and you know what you want to root this development on in terms of the heritage and nature and history of the country and so on. And then you make decisions. So a lot of my examples about the economy are about the villages, by the way. And none of it says you must uproot people or you must modernize in the way that I think people imagine, that you must turn a village into a township and that sort of thing. I try and ask the questions differently. You'll find it here, and I'm quite happy to engage. But then not use the language that I'm trying to do it in a way that doesn't use this language, right? Which I understand, but might be inaccessible to other people who want to do it. But I think as a general point, that's the approach I'm proposing we take. And you will see that it is in many ways a fundamental departure from how our current politics defines development.
Okay, thanks, Khade. Before Mbatane speaks, I want to make an intervention. There's always something that bothers me when I facilitate, and sometimes I say no, because us men are always told that we take up so much space. About 35 to 40% of the people here are women, and I haven't had a single hand from any of the females in the room. Thank you. After Mbatane, definitely it will be around for women. Third one, fantastic. Because I've got a person at the back. Now, I make this intervention for very clear and deliberate choices. One of the problems that are there with our political discourse is how significant sections of our population are simply blinded out. And talking about institutional literacy, it's an illiteracy that we have, and we've got to be mindful of that when we have conversations, when we are trying to build the political repertoire that we want and the things that we want to prioritize. And in my research, I'm fortunate because in research you are forced to have representative samples, so you talk to everybody. And it's amazing just how women sometimes, females, queer people, feel that even the texture of our policies do not speak to them. And that's partly because when we are trying to do this work, it's always the men. Yapa. Anyway, Mbatane.
So yapa.
Thank you very much to both of you. And I would like to first say that I do represent young people, so you are covered. Let me start by congratulating Songezo on his second book, and I am looking forward to reading your incisive work here. I have three very, very basic questions, and my first question is a philosophical one. And I would want to get your views on it. Can a society produce a leader or leaders better than itself? That's my first question to you. And the second question that I would like to ask you, Songezo, if you were to look at the South African challenges that we have now, would you characterize them as a leadership crisis or a crisis of accountability? That's my second question. And the last one, I haven't read the book, I must confess. I've just bought it now. But my cursory look at the book now, I see that on page 173, you talk about the
targets that have been set in the National Development Plan. And amongst those targets is a GDP of, I think it was 5.4%, yeah?
5.4% per
Yeah,
annum.
yes. And by 2022, if I remember well, the IDP, sorry, not the IDP, sorry, the NDP projected that we would have reduced our unemployment rate to about 16%, if I'm not mistaken. And the Gini coefficient, I think if I remember well, would have been reduced to 0.59 or thereabouts. But the essence of this is that since the adoption of the NDP in 2012, we have hardly met any of those development indicators. We have not even come close to meeting the majority of the development indicators that are articulated in the National Development Plan. And my question to you is, how or what would you attribute this failure, basically? Because I mean, it is, I don't have another word to describe it, quite honestly. How or what would you attribute the failure of us meeting the targets of the National Development Plan, which obviously has been touted as a plan that was meant to really take us out of the quagmire of poverty, inequality, and unemployment? Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm trying very hard to remember all three, but I think I can deal with them together or in sequence. So the first one is that, I think to your first question, is the societies that advance do not have leaders that are necessarily a representation of that society. But it has brave individuals who are willing to make the ideal a reality. That's a very difficult process of continuous disaffection with what you have, the step to which you now have to say, we need to keep moving forward to improve. 1, 2, 3, 4. Visionary leadership without the action itself is meaningless. And I think in many of these instances, the society advances in leaps and bounds because the person or people who are the collective that is in leadership essentially wants to be better than what the society is. So you're constantly looking to be better than what you already are. And therefore you keep trying and moving forward. So that's the thing. And I think if we were to always try and produce the best representation of who we are, we probably are going to fall short. Ask the United States of America and the problems they have now. So that is the first thing. The second question is, do we have a crisis of leadership or accountability? We have both, unfortunately, right? In the sense that the manner in which we understand leadership is skewed, and I spoke about that earlier on, which is we don't think of it as servant leadership. We think of it in terms of power and what the possibilities that it gives to us. So the people who in isiXhosa are abathunywa, that is the MPs and so on, and the people we elect, we call them my leader. Philosophically, that's your first problem right there. Because when we're also saying they should not be accountable, right? So I would say we've had both because we have elevated people who believe the elevation makes them unaccountable. And that's what we need to change. So that's the second thing. So why have we not reached the targets? So there is a concept that I think we underestimate. And that is a concept of institutions. Institutions are the capability and the infrastructure you build in order to do what you need to do. Because an individual or a loose collection of individuals cannot do them. So you need to build an institution to make possible what you want. So that's the first thing that we need. The second thing is a change in the thinking around the purpose for which you are forming those institutions, right? And we've got both of them wrong in the case of the NDP. So what happens simultaneously while the NDP is being touted and so on? You have destruction of institutions. You have a complete destruction of institutions. I can tell you, where you're destroying institutions, you're not going to be able to achieve anything because you're destroying the capacity. That's why the lights are going off. That's why the cops can't catch criminals. You're banning Clemeza there and those other people. That's why the prosecutors can't prosecute cases because the good prosecutors eventually went. And so we destroyed the institutions. And we put Malusi Gigaba there and Des van Rooyen, a treasure. No, these things have consequences. So that's what we've done. We've engaged in institutional destruction, but we've done something else. And that is to fantasize about the future we want rather than working with the present we have in order to get where we need to go. So let's use the unemployment. If you look at each of Ibrahim Patel's plans for a better economy and so on, they miss a very big thing that we spoke about earlier, which is the nature of the unemployment in South Africa. So, what kind of economy are you building? And where is that GDP growth located? Because the reality is, if you maintain the same structure of the economy that we have, with the geographical asymmetries that you have in terms of where that GDP is located, you are always going to have large parts of the Eastern Cape as the poor parts of the country. Because you're thinking about a big industrial society where people go into a factory at 8 o'clock and they come out at 5 o'clock and they are members of a union and that sort of thing. That's the ANC's way of thinking about development and economy. So the framing, therefore, of what you do in order to advance development and build an economy was misplaced, along with the destruction of institutions. But let me contrast this very quickly, because a favorite thing of leftists is to criticize gear and so on and so forth. So I wrote last year the history of the 100 years of the South African Reserve Bank. And then I came back to this book. And I had access to a lot of historical record. And it was fascinating to see the unsaid part of the rebuilding of this economy, which was the building of institutions. I'll make just one example and shut up. So in the early 1990s, before 94, and through 1994, 95, you have millions, tens of millions of man days, of work days lost due to strike action. And the crucial intervention is the Labor Relations Act, the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, and so on, and the CCMA and so on. The principle there is this: you must have a proper and credible dispute resolution mechanism in order to lower the number of wildcat strikes that you have that disrupt the economy. That's institutional thinking. So let me ask, what's the new labor philosophy now that we have? There is none. There's none. And so let me get back to what Lukhona said. The reason I am asking people, the people here with master's degrees and PhDs, is that, guys, voting doesn't solve that problem. That's an intellectual problem that we have. So, but you can't make an influence on the outcomes if you don't take political power to do it. You can't. Why must I take your suggestion? Who are you? So that's the boldness we must have in order to reflect this thinking in how we form the institutions and make them work. The CCMA was not there before. or the Labor Relations Act as we know it, but you have to build that architecture. And one of the things that happened immediately, productivity went up, because simply people are working. It's not even that the economy is inherently growing, but people are spending more time at work because disputes get resolved properly. And so the work we've got to do is a lot. Sorry, I also talk a lot.
It happens when you are asked a philosophical question.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Yanda Klasone. I run a non-profit organization by Gunubi Farmers Hall. Now I'm going to come from a completely different perspective because I work with people on the ground on a daily basis. So what I want to find out is, because it's great that we come together in these platforms and we discuss all these issues, but at the end of the day, we know that the ANC's base, where it is, and where the majority is. So now you also spoke about a mindset change that needs to happen. How do we then reach that base? Because if we're not reaching that base, whatever it is that we're discussing in these platforms is really not going to make a huge impact, because those same people are going to go and vote and still vote when the parties that they choose. So how do we then make these organizations that we're talking about accessible to those people, and also ensure that they have that mindset change? Because without them having that mindset change, we're just sitting here just talking. There won't really be any impact that we're able to affect. Yes.
So I was showing him what you do. That's the website I sent you earlier on. So the quick answer to this is to also change our mindset. So we must not mistake being poor and excluded with being intellectually deficient. Okay. That means the message that people can own their power is the most important one. We might call it civic education. I call it democratization, building a democratic culture, a culture of participation. Because that's the most important thing that needs to change. The conversation you have with people when you are with them matters. And if that conversation is a teacher and you must listen, they'll tell you what to do, you're doing it wrong. Must flip it around. And the question is, how do we make this democracy work for you? And people will say how they want that democracy work. And then you can have that conversation. So to use a simple term that we understand, I think the key is civic education, in a sense. But civic, political conversations at a local level. Because once you open and you flick that switch in the right direction, people start owning their power. Right? It's about people being in charge rather than people being led. So I think that's how we do it.
Oh, go in.
Yeah.
Oh, that was short. That was short.
That was very short.
All right, Susie.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Pumlangesi. From Duncan Village. My mind is like boiling. There's a lot that has been said here, and it really funa ukuyibeka kakuhle ndivele nto. Iyacingisa. Congratulations on your book, but Songezo. I don't know you. I have no background work on you that I know, so whatever I'm saying here is based on what you've just said. Nencwadi lena andikayifundi. My questions for you before ndithethe enye into endifuna uyithetha. Uyandichallenge kanti obana ndiyazisola uba kutheni ze ndibe lapha. Honestly, I left politics usweleka kuka sibari wam Eric Mtonga.
Yeah, I remember.
What my cousin and I went through yandenza ndayivala incwadi yepolitics. Being a former political detainee at the age of 16. So I have stories zoba ke ndingumntana sedangeni village and politics. So for years ndayivala i-chapter ye-politics. I wanted nothing to do with politics. Partly for izizathu ezininzi. So the reason why ndisithi ndiyazisola in inverted commas ngokuza apha, I feel like I'm being challenged in another area of my life that I've buried for years. Kange ndoba ndabalekela evangeli. I'm a preacher.
Uyasindisa mama.
Because I believe that I was running away from this thing. Politique. I even said, I'll never marry a politician. That's, I don't know whether it's a case that I spoke over my life or whatever. It's because of that experience. Yoku pila lampilo. Yala system. Now I'm sitting here, I'm a teacher by profession. And I have plus minus 28 years working experience. I've spent 12 and a half years in the classroom as a primary school teacher. And I've spent 14 years as a community development specialist. I've spent 2 years unemployed. I'm still unemployed. Umbuzo wamke uthi, here is your book, and to me it sounds like a concept that needs to be implemented. That's how it sounds to me. What's your plan? Who do you have in mind as your implementing agents for what you've written there? Where do we go from here? Earlier on, no Mamfene, ndiphakwe sasitishi sika Mamfene no Tabana. Siyathetha ndithi kuye, we need African solutions for African problems. We need Eastern Cape solutions for Eastern Cape problems. That conversation was sparked by the culture of conferences. I'm sorry to say this, I hate conferences. I'm sorry to say that.
I see a fun.
I hate a gathering that has nothing to implement when we leave the room. I don't want to be part with that. If there is no plan to implement, then bekusenza londo yenziwayo. My last employment, I was a training manager. And the program we were implementing, basically implemented up at Buffalo City. And the plan was straightforward, and it was working. Ufika kwam ndingene kubo as a community mobilization officer. And I saw firsthand how to mobilize a community and bring it to where you want it to be. It's doable. That is why I'm asking you, I'm challenging you. Spatele lendo pe Eastern Cape. I'm not going to lament about how the Eastern Cape is end. I'm not there. Speak up from here. And lastly, ndifuna ukuthi, a leader for me, it's somebody who answers people's problems every day. It is somebody who changes people's lives. That's a leader for me. And I do that every day as okay, they call us religious people, religious leaders. Fine, I'll settle for that, so that ndibe correct. But be politically correct, okay? So I guess what I'm trying to say is the people you are going to walk and work with, such that there's voter education, such that there's the much needed political education, such that there's active citizenry, are the people who care about the problems of this province. Find those people and you've got your team. Uba ben Shumaila benza de enzalandi nzongu David.
Nyuka.
You know, I love my leader, Uyesu Christo, because he was a problem solver. That's why I follow him and his principles. uyesu kristu zange afike endaweni ashiye iproblem angayisolvanga wayesolve neye-tax noba iyokhutshwa emlonyeni wefish, but he was a problem solver. So I believe in this province, look for problem solvers and you won't go wrong. Look for people who care about people, who know what's happening on the ground. Your mobilization kind of people, and people who abangakhathaliyo noba babhalwanga ndawo after the work has been done. You're looking for those people. Then if you have those people, work will be done and others will join in. And Shumail.
Engos.
I think Umguni is smiling because this is what we are trying to do, exactly as you say. I think the reason at Rivonia Circle we don't come alone without the kind of people that you're talking about is because the work that needs to be done after needs to be done by the people who are going to feel the change where they are. The only thing I will say is this, with respect to you and anyone you know, because we had a democracy, we didn't have a democracy builder here. We say Alice, which is this kind of work, is that we will come back and do it here. And it is exactly this kind of work that you are talking about, because it's that fundamental change. And we create a culture that is different. So, benkendabuza phangu umnganamu Dabano basifuna stage na up. And we said no. We don't want a stage because there are these subtle things that begin to create a dynamic of power between. So abantu kuthiwa addresswa. It's disempowering, that thing, because you're being addressed and so you must listen and go home. We want a different conversation, and that conversation is what's eating you here and what can we do to help you deal with it. Right? And I think if we have that conversation in as many places as possible in South Africa, you change that dynamic. And the politics is different. And it becomes, I think, the kind of politics you'd want to be part of. But we can stay in touch. Uloza, not Dabane, will so that we can talk.
Ngenile. Take two more and then I'll go here. Okay, now Zana. You know when you are now moving towards closure, the hands become more. But we'll take three more. Okay, yeah, and we move towards some online ones and then closure.
Oh, it's going on online. You.
We're live.
And first of all, thank you so much for your talk. I really enjoyed your intellectual discourse, so I really appreciate that. So a question actually posed on Umama. Essentially what is to be done. So in your book, which I haven't read, of course, but you speak about political economy. So essentially I'm arguing about yes, we can speak about personal injectment into community programs, but I say it's essentially less if the system is capitalistic. So so the question I want to ask, posing to you is, because you mentioned a lot about economic unemployment, and especially youth unemployment. So my question is what are your thoughts towards socialism? And socialism is based essentially. So what are your thoughts on the bigger national economic question? Because South Africa is essentially a very capitalistic country, and this has created a big economic divide and economic inequality. So what are your thoughts with the bigger economic questions associated to build on the political unrest in the country and inequality?
Thanks so much. So I'll because I'm hoping that you really will get a chance to read. So what I propose, is called either social democracy or democratic socialism. That's what I propose in the book. And I say it is a better representation of what morally South Africans want and what this constitution in many ways asks us to do. Right? So that is a starting point. But I also want to say that, in fact, there is a book, if you can get it. It's not on Kindle and all of these things. It's by Roberto Mangabera Unga. No, don't say you. You know him, you don't know it. So Roberto Mangabera Unga was, he was not only Obama's lecturer at Harvard, he's a Brazilian philosopher and former lawyer and so on. So he has a book called What the Left Should Propose. What the left should propose. It's not a big book. It's the same size as this one, or smaller. And what he says there is that the first thing the left needs to do is to accept the capitalistic nature of the global economy. And you ask yourself, how do we get the democratic socialist outcomes in that environment? Because if you set yourself a task, and I know that's not what you're saying, but if you set yourself a task of defeating capitalism, you're going to fight a long time, my friend, and not win. Right? So he says, how do you do this? Now, Vavi and them were talking about the Lula moment and so on. It is from Brazil trying to answer this question. How do you create and enable democratic socialist outcomes in a capitalist world? So, by the way, I bought this book for Uvavi and I gave it to him, and I know he never read it. Because his rhetoric says he never read it. So the challenge I'm posing, so I'm saying the capitalistic formulation of what we need to do is problematic, right? We need to shift to democratic socialism. But that democratic part must be a real thing, because you also need to acknowledge and accept the freedoms, and you conceive the state in a way that is different to how we conceive it now. I explain it here in the book as well. But if you get a chance, read it. But I agree with you. The key question is, how do you create these kind of outcomes in a capitalistic world that is interconnected? Because otherwise, if you make choices that cause a dislocation from your trading partners and so on, they simply retaliate also. And they nail you. And they nail you. And you end up nowhere. So it's about being smart. It goes back to that intellectual task again that I was talking about. That's what Brazil was able to do for quite a while. Before then, they also messed it up.
And Lula went to jail.
Yeah.
And came out.
Molweni, Dingu Quinana. I was born and raised here in East London, and I'm studying at UCT. The main thing that I want to bring up and I want to ask, well, the first thing I want to bring up is, I think we can all be aware of the fact that capitalism has won and sexism has won in the society we live in, and not just here in South Africa, but in the whole world. And because capitalism has won, in order for us to bridge the gap between people in rural areas and us in urban areas, they need to be educated. Abantu who stay in the rural areas, they need to know that something is wrong in order for them to know better. So as much as I can appreciate that we're sitting here and having a conversation about how things need to be better, we need to stop voting for the ANC, we know this because we are educated. I'm not saying that everyone in the rural areas does not know that because they're not educated, but at the end of the day, when it's voting time and the ANC goes to Edutwa and gives them Jojo tanks and gives them electricity for that month, they will be bribed. They will believe that, let me vote for the ANC. But the ANC will win, and then for the next 5 years, they're gonna do nothing. In fact, things will get worse. So my question is, what do you plan on doing, or what do we as educated people plan on doing to actually bridge that gap? Because at the end of the day, as much as we can say that, I don't know how to say this, but as much as we can say that, you know, development isn't just because you're not modernized, that doesn't mean you're not developed. That is very true. But at the end of the day, they need to be educated in order to be able to understand that they deserve better. Because how are you supposed to know that you deserve better if you don't know that there is actually a key to that? And I think the main thing that we can all agree on is that the main key to understanding what is better for you is through education. So my question is, okay, we can sit here, say we're going to create more political parties, we'll vote for 6 other political parties. Okay, we'll do that, but those 6 other political parties will not have the same publicity as the ANC. They won't have the same publicity as the DA. So what are you going to do to educate those people in the rural areas and make them understand that better needs to happen, so that when someone does come forward with the idea of a better political party, someone who isn't corrupt, someone who actually has a pure heart and wants better for black people or people of color because they are marginalized, what are you going to do to make sure that that marginalized part of society knows what's better for them and can bridge the gap? Because right now there is a gap that seems to be getting bigger, but not an actual active solution on how to educate these marginalized groups on how to get better for themselves.
Khadebe nanzi organizer yakho yase UCT.
Yes, yeah. So quickly, I think, so when I mentioned, so we co-founded an organization called Rivonia Circle, right? And I spoke about the work that we're doing and the approach we take. Part of that, and I'll use a simple example, is part of that is enabling a conversation that says, and I'm trying to speak to your point about knowing better and therefore expecting more. That is, I made the example earlier of having a tap in every home, not in the community, where you must still walk 800 meters or a kilometer, whatever the case is, to a tap so you can draw water, right? It might not seem like a lot. It's just that the task that we need to have is that it only needs to happen in one place, and it changes the expectation. But the work of organizing means that you've got to have somewhere people beginning to demand different. To say the single communal tap would have is actually just not good enough. We need tap in every home where there is no, so that we can have running water in the house and all of these other amenities without leaving the village to go and live elsewhere, right? But what we must be careful to not do is to also have a conversation that is patronizing, because we need to have this conversation in a way that helps people to surface these things themselves. Because when they do, it becomes something that they wanted, that they are willing to fight for. Because the political culture we have is to say, we will do these things for you. And so the people who set the expectation are not the people who have the experience of what it's like to be excluded. And so that's my answer. But we are doing that work. There are other organizations that also do similar work, but that is the premise of it. That is the essence of it.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Gochakazi Nguva. I'm a rural girl as well. Ngumkhaya wami umfecane, uNguva ngumfundisi waphakulalali yakhe.
Tell ngathi khona i-society ezawuqala.
We are all rural. I think ilali zasikhulisa kahle. Okay, i-challenge yami ngifuna ukuphosa kuqala kuwe Songezo. What have you done so far for uMqanduli as uSongezo?
So, let me share my journey with you to answer that question. I talk about the moment I had myself, because the trajectory of the professional is to look after your own family and yourself, okay? And try and fashion as good a life as you can have. And like a lot of people, I have done that for the last 23 years that I have been working. in order to be able to support my family. So to answer your question is that's what I've been doing the last 23 years. I've been looking after my family. Most of us do that.
So akho nto ubukhe wayenza for your community.
No.
Okay.
No. And no. Can you give me a chance? You asked your question. The question is, do you then continue on that path and only look after yourself? Because you've got the possibility to do that. Or do you ask a different question, which is, with the opportunities that I've had and the capability I've had over the years, what can I do for society? And so this is my journey. I had a job at ABSA, I was an executive, I left it. I co-founded a non-profit with Lukona. I didn't get paid for almost a year because I wanted to do something with my life that is meaningful. I've got 3 children and a mother who's no longer working. I took that gamble. Writing the book is just part of what I did to have the conversation. I also did that because if I'm going to ask people to take similar risks, I've got to do it myself. I can't do it from the comfort of my work. And so that's my journey. To answer your question directly, it's precisely because I've done nothing
Okay.
that I'm here.
Can I move forward then?
Yes.
Thank you. I have a challenge for you, ne? Mna ndiyayithanda ANC. I'm not a politician.
Yes.
But I appreciate ANC with my every being, and I'm
Yes.
not apologetic about that. Secondly, I'm a member in good standing in ANC. So I want to arm you to say to you, you have to do your homework correctly in order to convince people like me to join whatever manifesto that you are doing. So far, I've been here for how many hours now? I can't get the gist, except for the fact that you're doing the same thing that's done by DA and EFF and talking about the ANC and the mistakes of the ANC. Sifuna a solution to the problem. So I wish, Songezo, you can go back home, do your homework right, come back to us and tell us what is your solution to the current problem. Not come back to us and tell us the wrongs of the ANC because he has born. I hope you understand that. I'm willing to listen to somebody who's coming with an alternative to what we have. Otherwise, I'm black, green, and gold. And it will take somebody who has the guts to convince me to leave the ANC and join whatever new political party that's coming. When I came here, I asked him, political party. What can I get? Oh, not Tabane Jimbuzile. Tabane Sizotina. So,
this one or that one?
Keith.
Okay. By two.
Jimbuzile, Zontini, Zotini, Sizolonji party or Sizomamele book launch. What I go to Wabuza Ngolo from that, oh, Dinendo, the sense I buy Ingati, Sizov Fulumbutomcha. Mamela Songezo,
Zawusikwa kulwa wakho ukuze.
Hayi andoyiki kwami tukena. Ndim nje ndimember ndim sisiqu andilandeli kwasiqu samntu. I'm not an individual nto and to follow is individuals. But when it's wrong, when it's right. And I'm an independent person. Ndinengqondo yami ndicinga kolwam hlobo. So far, Songezo andikakuva kahle uba uthi masithini. Do you get what I mean?
No.
And ndine concept uyayazi uLoza no Tabane endifuna uyenza yem to try and come up with a solution to the problems that we have. But ke andizokwazi uyichaza apha but i-challenge kum noyi-2 because kama nditheni ne-NPO nana ndithi. So la concept ndiyathanda uyidiscussa nani in camera. Ndicinga uba la concept is trying to help our people. Our people are tired of power mongers. People want to displace the ANC for them to be in the kitty. We don't want that. We are tired of that. We want people who are coming with legit solutions to the problems. Thank you.
thank you, Sisi. I'm actually glad you've had this conversation. You've had this provocation. So I'll respond to quite a few of the things you've said. The first is that just in the language that you use and the language that I use to engage in the political discussion, you already see why you are in the ANC and I'm not. Because your formulation as you are speaking now says, what are you going to do for me? No, I mean me as me, I'm here in front, what are you doing? Yeah, I'm getting there. Yes.
No, let's avoid a dialogue. Let me regain my space as a facilitator and protect our guests.
Yes, and I kept quiet. So there's a fundamental difference in culture. Because I've said you town diva, but I've kept saying that the manner of doing politics is where people are addressed and people come and say, this is what we're going to do for you. And then of course it doesn't happen. It's not because I haven't done my homework, I have. And the reason I haven't sat here and regaled people with all the things that's wrong, and so on, is precisely because that's not the conversation. I can have it in detail. And both of us are from that side. There's a reason for that. The political culture needs to change. That culture of you are my leader and you are bringing the solutions to me is the patronizing culture I'm talking about. That needs to change. So that's the first difference between how you've expressed your understanding of politics to me and how I am expressing my view of politics. I have spoken to the program that we do, which we call Democracy Build, among others, which is different, which again is premised on invoking political agency in the community rather than me saying I'm the Messiah. That has done something for our people. We don't use that language. It's not our people. They don't belong to us. They are people. They are South African citizens. They belong to no one. They belong to this country. That's difference number 2. Right? So I hope that's clear. The third thing, I spoke about the power relations you introduced when people are together engaged in political conversation. Yabona la tafile is staging and uyayazmos ne? That thing needs to change because you're building a different democratic culture where the people who are sitting there are here. Bangabathunywa. The people who set the agenda is the people. Ndithume. Xa ndifuna undithume, andizi kuwe ndithi ndifuna ukwenza lento ndithume ndizoyenza. It doesn't work. It's a different thing. And so as much as ingathi yakuxaka, I can see why mhlawumbe ingathi yakuxaka lento ingathi ndithetha ngayo ndiyayenza, because it turns the current understanding and practice of politics on its head and doesn't treat people as our people, which I think is a patronizing term. The last thing I want to say is this. There is a tendency to say, in order to engage in politics to have legitimacy, you need to qualify yourself by having done something that I can see. Ungubani. Who appointed you the person who determines how others are going to earn the legitimacy to participate in politics? I hear that a lot. We all have our journeys. We all have our journeys of how we want to help this country. Other people start businesses and employ people. But someone else might say you're a capitalist. But there are 30 people who have a sustainable income. And they do it. So, what I want to appeal to you, and as Launching Party, we're launching a book. That is called Manifesto. That is called Manifesto is simply because I put specific proposals. So if you want to know what I think needs to be done, ilapasis. Get the book we found. I'm quite happy to engage afterwards because it's a different conversation. You are saying to me, I disagree with what you propose on 1, 2, 3. I also say here, I intend to do everything I say needs to be done here. Now, what I want to you to reflect on is whether it is then up to you to say, I do not have a right to make that change and decision in my life because in your view, I've done nothing that you approve of so far. Because that kind of attitude is anti-democratic. You are a citizen, a full citizen with full political rights and obligations, regardless of what you've done. There is no qualifying criteria. That someone else determines the gatekeeping. So,
okay.
And then we can engage.
I'm starting to be the person standing between people and dinner. So I think this might be our last question. Am I right, Taban? All right.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Stephen Keat. I live in a little town called Kids Beach, 30 kilometers from here. I don't go to many political rallies, but I did go to one in East London some years ago when there was, the ex-president Zuma was campaigning. And it was amazing for me because I hadn't been to these sorts of things. And what a tremendously powerful guy he was on stage. For me, it was very impressive. I thought, yo, this guy is powerful and this nation will be in good hands. Here is somebody who can make decisions, who is fearless. My analysis was right in some ways. He was fearless and so on.
And very decisive.
But I want to turn around because, in fact, I came here to this rally because I thought maybe I would find another Messiah for what was going to be a really hard journey that we have to get from here to where I think we want to be. Certainly where I want to be. I've read the book, and I think it's an amazing analysis. I think that you write beautifully, but I'm delighted that you even speak more beautifully than you write. You're a strong speaker, and I think one day when you get to the rallies, you will make a big difference. My journey is a different kind of journey. Living in Kids Beach, I'm a representative of the ratepayers and residents, and we have major problems there with service delivery. We have a big development of new houses. It's a beautiful development, but the government is not setting the rules and keeping the developers sticking to the rules. The consequences of this not happening are going to be significant for people who live there and for people who buy their houses. The values are going to drop. There are many, many people who are first-time homeowners who buy small apartments as a starting point. The value of these things is going to drop. There are health and safety problems because of the sewage going into the water. There are water supply problems. There's not enough water for the number of people who live there. So what we are doing as the Ratepayers and Residents Association is we're saying, no, that's not how we are going to be spectators. We are not going to be spectators onto this thing. We're going to try and resolve it. So how we are doing it is that we are engaging with the authorities, Buffalo Municipality, many, many departments in Buffalo City, Department of Water Affairs, Department of Roads, etc., to make sure that the bulk infrastructure can match the number of people who come into the place. In principle, what we do is we become clear about what is required, what is expected, what is regulated by law, and then we begin at the lower level to engage with the officials. And if that doesn't work, then we climb up to the next level. And then we climb up to the next level, and eventually the municipal manager. And when that doesn't work, unfortunately, we take the legal route. We go to court, and we've done that already. And we've got a number of things going. I didn't come here to tell you that. What I came here to tell you is that I was very keen to see what new leadership one could link into to make sure that we are not just alone there in Kids Beach fighting this battle. We want to be able to learn from others. Now, you mentioned earlier on AfriForum, there's solidarity, there are these kinds of organizations, but I'm reluctant to go to those organizations as support systems for reasons that I'm sure that you'll understand. But what I am hoping we can do this evening, I'm hoping that what will emerge this evening is in fact some common ground with other people here who are trying to achieve something in your communities, also through the authorities. And maybe you're finding that it's a tricky journey, and maybe it's going to be worthwhile to share the burden, to learn from one another's experiences, mistakes, knowledge, to pool some resources. And it's just one aspect of living in this beautiful country of ours. I'm looking for connecting to the kinds of people who want to and who are able to and need to join up on this effort. We can leave education and health and what to other people. I think that's how the thing will work. Find people who are energetic in a particular sphere and are dedicated to getting it resolved and building teams as we go. And I'm hoping that there are some people who either afterwards or through Keith and Gezi, I don't know if you're keeping records about who's here this evening, but through a network, let's try to find a positive way forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Because that was not a question and a call to action, I'm going
I won't
to
say anything.
I'm going to interdict you so that you can also get an opportunity to sign books for some people who have already bought copies before they run home. But I do think that what strikes me in the conversation today and the point that has just been made now, there is this yearning of a different space in South Africa to engage in a meaningful conversation about the country. And that's partly because the crisis that confronts us has become so immediate. Now, those who have foresight live a life of frustration because they spend 10, 15 years warning about a crisis that then manifests itself far more down the line and in far bigger ways. And for example, the issue that was made about educating people in the villages and closing down the space between villages and urban communities. Part of what has gone wrong in South Africa is that there is political disengagement in higher rates in urban areas than in rural areas. So when I did a study in KZN of about 1,000 people across 10 rural towns, people in rural areas are more registered, first of all, more registered as a population of voter-aged population, more registered to vote than people in urban areas. People in urban areas, when they are dissatisfied, what we are starting to find, and if you look in the metros, particularly in Gauteng, which is what the ANC would then say is accountable for them losing power, is that people decide to stay at home and not go and vote. So in actual fact, when you talk about political participation, we've got a crisis across the spectrum. There's no better community than the other. The solutions to that might be different and may need us to do many things and so on. So I speak with a little bit of a biased cap because I know what we are trying to do and what we're trying to achieve, blah, blah, blah. But I suppose this question about a program of action is becoming important and urgent. When we leave here, what should we do? But before you answer, I want to put a question to the room. How many people here are ready to do some work to change South Africa? Okay. So it's not a lack of appetite, but it is how do we leave this room and go build those fundamental principles we agree on. And therefore the question is, what should, because I don't think, look, if you live in South Africa, you know that this is not how a country should treat you. I don't care who you vote for, where you belong, but if you live in this country, and worse if you've traveled the world, it becomes even worse. When I stayed in the UK, when I came back, I didn't want to own a car, but I had to own a car because the structural condition in South Africa is such that I can't do the work that I do without owning a car. And that's a burden to me. That's money. Cars are difficult to maintain. It's easier to use quality public transport. So if you live in this country and you've lived in other countries, you definitely know that a country can behave differently than what is happening. How do we leave that door and begin to draw up the principles that unite us as a platform to start talking about how we change South Africa?
Okay, no, I'm not going to give a long answer. I'm going to say that we were here a few weeks ago in town, and we had a small public meeting. I think it's time we come back again, right? But this is what I want to say, and this, we can see a reluctance in answering the question of what are you going to do, because it is linked to the political culture we have. So this is what we are going to do. So we are going to come back and have a conversation that is not a book launch to answer the question that Lukhona is saying. But I want to be clear that we don't come to these conversations and present a plan for you. We work together to develop one. Because you live here, I don't. You know into a Chisibunzi here, I don't. I am not fit to tell you what you should do and how you should do it, but I'm quite happy to work with you to work out what needs to be done so that we all have an equity in what needs to be done, right? So we'll come back. Those of you who RSVP'd, I have your email addresses. I'll send a general email address, but from Rivonia Circle, because this is Rivonia Circle's work, the non-profit. But if you didn't RSVP, which was fine with me, is that send an email to info@rivoniacircle.org. But the way we work, we don't patronize. You need to come there ready to speak. And on the basis of what we've spoken about, you then make the decision of what it is you do and where you start. And that is where that kind of community begins. We are not messiahs. We're not messiahs, and you're not our people. We are all South Africans. That's how I'll close it.
Okay, thanks, Khadebe, and congratulations. We can give him a clap, a round of applause. Thank you, and I think this was actually a very robust kind of conversation that stretches. I think we had about 10 people speak here. I've been to all your book launches, so I'm not being biased when I say I think this is one of the robust conversations we've had and really shows how immersed people are in the conversations about their communities. Last I checked, there was water outside, there was a bit of wine. I don't know what is still there. I think it's best that you remain here so that you can sign some books than outside, because I don't think there's a proper space there. So I'll let you sign some books from here. And if you have not bought a copy, I'm sure now you are convinced that he speaks well, so it must be well written. Please buy a book.